My name is Marina, 29 years old, and I've spent my entire life living in the shadow of my perfect sister, Abigail. A few months ago, at her extravagant wedding, I discovered my assigned seat was hidden behind a massive pillar, out of sight and out of mind. Just when I thought I'd hit rock bottom, a handsome stranger sat beside me and whispered, "Just follow my lead and pretend you're my date." Little did I know this moment would change everything about my family, my confidence, and my future. If you're watching this video, please hit the like button and subscribe to my channel. I'd love to know where you're watching from, so drop your location in the comments before I take you through the wedding day that started as my worst nightmare, but ended up changing my life forever. I grew up in an affluent Seattle suburb where everything seemed picture perfect from the outside. Our house was the envy of the neighborhood with its manicured lawn and bright blue shutters. But inside those walls, a different reality existed. One where my sister Abigail was the sun, and everyone else simply orbited around her. From our earliest years, the differences between us were emphasized. Abigail with her straight blonde hair that caught the light, perfectly graceful movements, and natural athletic ability. Then there was me, awkward Marina with unruly brown curls constantly tripping over my own feet, more comfortable with sketchbooks than sports equipment. "Marina, why can't you be more like your sister?" became the unofficial family motto. When Abigail scored the winning goal in her soccer championship, my parents threw her a party with all her friends. When I won first place in the regional art competition, that same year, my certificate ended up magnetized to the refrigerator with little fanfare. By middle school, I had accepted my place in the family hierarchy. Abigail continued collecting achievements like precious gems, homecoming queen, student body, president, valedictorian. Each accomplishment was celebrated with enthusiasm, photographed extensively, and mentioned to anyone who would listen. My parents' social media accounts were shrines to Abigail's perfection. Meanwhile, I carved out my own niche. Art became my sanctuary. While Abigail dominated the physical world, I created worlds of my own on paper and canvas. My high school art teacher, Mrs. Lambert, was the first person who ever seemed truly impressed by what I could do. "Marina, you have a gift," she told me after school one day while examining my portfolio. "Your perspective is unique. Don't lose that." Those words became a lifeline I clung to during family dinners, where Abigail's latest accomplishments took center stage while my achievements went unnoticed. Things got even worse when our parents divorced during my sophomore year. The already fragile family structure completely splintered. Mom kept the house and Dad moved to a downtown apartment. With limited time and emotional resources, they focused even more intensely on Abigail, as if preserving their investment in the child most likely to succeed. I retreated further into my art, developing severe anxiety that manifested as stomach aches before family gatherings and panic attacks before school presentations. No one really noticed except my one close friend Tara, who often found me hyperventilating in bathroom stalls. College became my escape. I earned a partial scholarship to a respected art school in Portland, just far enough from Seattle to breathe freely but close enough for occasional visits. For the first time, I was judged on my own merits, not in comparison to Abigail. While I studied graphic design, Abigail attended an Ivy League university on the East Coast, further cementing her golden child status. During holiday breaks, I'd return home to hear endless stories about Abigail's incredible professors' internships and new wealthy friends. After graduation, I built a modest career as a freelance graphic designer in Seattle, slowly developing a client base and renting a small but bright studio apartment. Abigail landed a high-powered consulting job in New York, continuing to live the charmed life everyone expected of her. Then 3 years ago, Abigail surprised everyone by announcing she was moving back to Seattle to take a prestigious position at a local firm. I saw this as a potential opportunity to rebuild our relationship as adults, away from the direct influence of our parents' favoritism. I invited her to coffee, gave her recommendations for neighborhoods, and genuinely tried to establish a connection. Abigail responded with lukewarm interest occasionally, including me in gatherings with her new Seattle friends when someone canceled last minute. At one of these gatherings, she introduced Bradley Hamilton, tall, polished, from old Seattle money, and clearly smitten with my sister. While Abigail circulated among guests, I found myself chatting with Bradley about his family's historic home and my interest in architectural design. "You should show Abigail your work sometime," he suggested. "She mentioned you do something with art." That brief conversation revealed how little my sister had shared about me with the man she was dating. Still, Bradley seemed genuinely interested in my design perspective, and I foolishly thought this might be another chance to strengthen my relationship with Abigail. For several months, I heard nothing from my sister. Then an elaborate cream envelope arrived in my mailbox, an invitation to the wedding of Abigail Jane Porter and Bradley William Hamilton. I stared at it for a long time, hope and apprehension battling inside me. Maybe this wedding would be the event that finally brought our fractured family together. When the thick cream envelope arrived at my apartment, I traced my fingers over the embossed silver lettering announcing Abigail and Bradley's wedding date. Despite our complicated history, excitement bubbled up inside me. Surely a wedding, a time for family unity, would be the perfect opportunity for Abigail to finally see me as a valuable part of her life. The invitation itself was a work of art: letterpress printing on handmade paper, a custom wax seal, and a hand-drawn map of the exclusive lakeside venue. I immediately began saving for a dress that would be appropriate for such an elegant affair, cutting back on morning coffees and working extra freelance projects through weekends. After 3 weeks of searching, I found it. A deep emerald silk dress that complemented my coloring without being flashy enough to draw attention away from the bride. It cost nearly a month's rent, but I convinced myself it was an investment in our sisterly relationship. For the wedding gift, I decided to create something personal, rather than selecting from their extravagant registry. I spent weeks researching and then painting a detailed watercolor of the Seattle rooftop bar, where Bradley had proposed to Abigail, capturing the sunset lighting and city skyline perfectly. I had it professionally framed, certain that such a thoughtful, personalized gift would touch my sister. My hopes soared even higher when Abigail texted asking if I could attend pre-wedding events. "Of course," I replied, immediately rearranging my work schedule to accommodate every date she mentioned. The bridal shower was held at an upscale downtown restaurant in a private room dripping with white orchids and champagne. I arrived early, gift in hand, nervously smoothing my carefully selected outfit. "Marina, you made it." Abigail greeted me with an air kiss near my cheek. "You can put your gift on that table." I noticed immediately that I was one of the few women not wearing the signature pale pink that all the bridesmaids had coordinated. When the photographer arranged group photos, I stood awkwardly to the side, uncertain whether to join. "Oh, we're just doing bridal party photos now," the wedding coordinator explained kindly when she noticed my confusion. "Family photos will be at the wedding." During the elegant lunch, I was seated at the farthest table from Abigail, alongside distant cousins and her workplace acquaintances. While using the restroom, I overheard two bridesmaids touching up their makeup and discussing the wedding party. "So, what's the deal with her sister?" one asked. "Why isn't she a bridesmaid?" "Abigail said they're not really close. Apparently, she's kind of awkward, and Abigail worried she'd feel uncomfortable with all the bridesmaid attention. Plus, you know how Abigail is about aesthetics. Everything has to be perfect." I froze in the stall cheeks, burning with humiliation. I'd been excluded not out of consideration for my feelings, but because I didn't fit my sister's perfect vision. The bachelorette weekend in Napa Valley brought further disappointment. Initially included on the group text, I purchased plane tickets and took time off work. 2 weeks before the event, I received a private message from the maid of honor. "So sorry, Marina, but we had to limit numbers for the wine tours and accommodations. Abigail thought you'd understand since you're not in the wedding party. We can catch up at the rehearsal dinner." I swallowed my hurt and tried to discuss the pattern with our mother over lunch the following week. "Mom, I feel like Abigail is deliberately excluding me from wedding activities. Did I do something wrong?" My mother sighed, setting down her fork. "Marina, please don't make this about you. Planning a wedding is stressful, and Abigail has so many obligations with Bradley's family being so prominent. Just support her decisions and try not to add to her stress." I nodded, swallowing the familiar lump in my throat. Once again, my feelings were secondary to Abigail's needs. Despite these warning signs, I made one final attempt to connect, offering to help with wedding preparations the week before the ceremony. "Actually, that would be helpful," Abigail responded, surprising me. "Could you stuff the welcome bags for out-of-town guests? There are about 200. I spent an entire day assembling bags with Seattle souvenirs, artisanal chocolates, and wedding weekend itineraries, hoping this contribution would be recognized. When I delivered them to the hotel, Abigail was meeting with the wedding planner and barely looked up to acknowledge me. The night before the wedding, I sat alone in my apartment while social media filled with photos from the rehearsal dinner, an event to which I had not been invited despite being the bride's only sister. Still, I refused to give up. Tomorrow was the wedding itself, where surely family would be acknowledged and included. I went to sleep holding on to that final fragile hope. The morning of Abigail's wedding dawned bright and clear, one of those rare, perfect Seattle days that locals treasure. I stood before my mirror giving myself a pep talk while applying makeup with extra care. Today is about Abigail. Don't take anything personally. Just smile and be supportive. I whispered to my reflection, trying to ignore the knot of anxiety in my stomach. I had spent hours styling my unruly curls into something elegant, matching my hair clip to the embellishments on my emerald dress. The final effect was polished but not attention-seeking, exactly what I thought would be appropriate for the sister of the bride. Following the invitation instructions, I arrived at the waterfront estate an hour before the ceremony. The venue was breathtaking, a historic mansion with manicured gardens sloping down to lake views. Staff in black tie directed arriving guests, while florists made final adjustments to elaborate arrangements of white roses and hydrangeas. Near the garden entrance, a calligrapher had created a stunning seating chart on an antique mirror. Groups of early guests clustered around it, finding their table assignments. I waited patiently for my turn, scanning the ornate script for my name. When the crowd thinned, I approached the display and methodically checked each table, certain there must be a place of honor for immediate family. After 3 careful searches, I finally spotted it. Marina Porter, Table 19. I frowned, unable to locate Table 19 on the reception layout map. A young woman with a clipboard and wedding planner badge approached. "Can I help you find something?" "Yes, please, I'm trying to locate Table 19, I explained. She consulted her tablet, swiping through several screens. "Table 19, that's in the far corner of the ballroom behind the dance floor." "There must be some mistake," I said, my voice faltering slightly. "I'm Abigail's sister." The coordinator's expression shifted to confusion, then embarrassment. "Let me double-check with the bride." She stepped away, typing rapidly on her phone. After an uncomfortable minute, she returned, unable to meet my eyes. "I've confirmed with Ms. Porter. Your assignment to Table 19 is correct. I'm sorry." My cheeks burning, I thanked her and walked toward the ceremony area, trying to process this information. Perhaps Abigail had seated family throughout the reception to better host all guests. This rationalization dissolved when I spotted my mother in the front row for the ceremony, alongside Abigail's bridesmaids' parents and Bradley's extended family. "Marina," my mother acknowledged with a brief nod when she saw me. "The ceremony is about to start. You should find your seat." "Aren't family members sitting together?" I asked. "The front rows are reserved for parents and grandparents," she explained dismissively. "Your seat should be marked with your name." Searching the rows, I finally found a small card with my name, in the last row behind a massive decorative pillar that partially obscured the view of the altar. As I sat down, I realized I could see only a portion of the ceremonial area, where my sister would soon exchange vows. The string quartet began playing, signaling the start of the ceremony. Throughout the proceedings, I craned my neck, trying to glimpse Abigail in her gown, catching only fragments. The edge of her veil, her bouquet as she raised it, Bradley's face as he recited vows. The pillar blocked most of my view, as if my sister had carefully ensured I would be present, but invisible. After the ceremony, guests flowed toward the cocktail hour on the terrace. I spotted our Aunt Judith, who had practically helped raise us after our parents' divorce. "Aunt Judith," I called, approaching with arms outstretched for a hug. She turned, recognition flickering in her eyes before she glanced over my shoulder. "Oh, Marina, how lovely to see you. Excuse me, I need to congratulate your sister." She hurried away without the hug, leaving me standing alone. This scene repeated with various family members throughout the cocktail hour. Brief acknowledgments followed by quick escapes, as if my presence made them uncomfortable. The final blow came when I overheard my mother speaking to one of Bradley's relatives. "Yes, Abigail is our pride and joy. She's essentially an only child. She's always been exceptionally independent and driven." I stood frozen champagne glass halfway to my lips, as my mother effectively erased my existence. Fighting tears, I retreated to the reception hall to find my assigned table before the general announcement for dinner. Table 19 was exactly as promised, tucked in the farthest corner of the ballroom, half hidden behind a structural column. A single place setting waited on the otherwise empty table marked miscellaneous guests. The center floral arrangement was noticeably smaller than those on other tables, and my chair faced the wall rather than the head table. I sat down no longer able to maintain the cheerful facade I'd worn all day. Pulling out my phone, I texted my friend Tara. SOS. Need emergency call in 30 minutes. Simune. Wedding disaster. What kind of sister puts her only sibling at a reject table behind a pillar? A deep voice asked. I looked up startled to find a stranger standing beside my isolated table. Tall with dark hair and warm brown eyes, he wore his tuxedo with the casual confidence of someone accustomed to formal events. Unlike the other guests, he was looking directly at me with genuine interest rather than uncomfortable avoidance. The kind who wishes I didn't exist, apparently. I responded too emotionally exhausted to maintain social niceties. He gestured to the empty chair across from me. Mind if I join the reject table? The view of that pillar is exceptional. For the first time that day, I felt my lips curve into a genuine smile. I'm James, he said, extending his hand across the table after sitting down. His grip was warm and firm, a contrast to the cold shoulders I'd been receiving all day. Marina, I replied, the sister no one acknowledges. Ah, so we're in similar boats. I'm Bradley's estranged cousin. Or is it estranged brother? I forget which lie the family is telling these days. I studied him more carefully, noting the resemblance to Bradley now that he mentioned it. The same strong jawline and straight nose, though James had darker coloring and laugh lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled more frequently. What did you do to earn your exile? I asked, genuinely curious. Refused to join the family business. He shrugged. Generations of Hamilton men managing real estate portfolios and investment trusts, and I decided to become an architect instead. Apparently, designing buildings rather than owning them is unforgivable. That seems extreme. I observed, relaxing slightly in his presence. Family has a special talent for knowing exactly where to stick the knife. He said, his casual tone belied by the understanding in his eyes, like seating the bride's sister behind a pillar. That's impressively passive-aggressive. A surprised laugh escaped me. I've been trying to figure out if I should feel more hurt or angry. Why choose go for both? He grinned, then leaned forward conspiratorially. So, what's your story? What heinous crime did you commit against society to deserve the pillar of shame? For the next 15 minutes, I found myself telling the stranger things I rarely admitted aloud. About growing up in Abigail's shadow, my attempts to connect being rebuffed, and the pattern of exclusion leading to this wedding day. The worst part, I concluded, is that I still showed up hoping things would be different. James nodded thoughtfully. Hope is persistent. It's why I'm here too, though I suspected I'd be at a table by the kitchen. At least you have a full table. I gestured to the empty chairs surrounding us. About that, he said, eyes twinkling with mischief. I have a proposal that might make this evening more interesting for both of us. I raised an eyebrow. I'm listening. Join forces with me. He leaned forward again. Just follow my lead and pretend you're my date. Let's change this narrative. Why would you want to do that? I asked suspiciously. 3 reasons. He counted on his fingers. 1, it looks less pathetic for both of us. 2, it might make certain people reconsider their treatment of us. And 3, his expression softened. No one should feel invisible at a family event. I hesitated, weighing the potential for more embarrassment against the connection I already felt with this unexpected ally. What exactly would this entail? I asked. Nothing complicated. We walk around together, dance, chat with other guests, act like we're having the time of our lives rather than nursing our wounds in the corner. And if anyone asks how we know each other, we tell the truth. We met at the wedding and hit it off immediately. His smile was warm and without pressure. No obligation, just an offer to make the evening less miserable. Something about his straightforward approach and the genuine warmth in his eyes made the decision easy. Why not? I said. It's not like this day can get worse. That's the spirit, He laughed, standing and offering his hand. Shall we get some champagne? With James at my side, the reception transformed. We strolled arm in arm past relatives who had earlier avoided eye contact, now watching curiously, as we collected champagne flutes from passing waiters. Your aunt is staring, James whispered, nodding subtly toward Aunt Judith. Let her stare, I replied, feeling a surprising surge of confidence. When the band began playing, James led me to the dance floor. Full disclosure, I'm a terrible dancer, I warned. Then we'll be terrible together, he assured me smoothly, guiding me into a simple box step that even I couldn't mess up. As we danced, I became aware of increasing attention, whispers, glances, and outright stares from wedding guests. Everyone's looking at us, I murmured nervously. Good, James replied. Let them wonder who the mysterious woman is that the black sheep is so captivated by. From the head table, I caught Abigail watching us, her perfect features arranged in an expression of confusion and displeasure. For once, I wasn't the one feeling uncomfortable under her gaze. Your sister has noticed us, James observed. She's probably trying to figure out who would voluntarily spend time with me. I said, old insecurities surfacing. James's hand tightened slightly on my waist. Or she's realizing she miscalculated by trying to hide you away. As the music ended, the wedding coordinator approached the microphone announcing dinner service and the beginning of speeches. We returned to table 19, where servers had begun delivering salads, looking surprised to find guests at the forgotten table. James pulled out my chair for me, then took his seat, reaching across to squeeze my hand. Trust me for what comes next, he said cryptically. What does that mean? I asked, suddenly apprehensive. Before he could answer, the coordinator returned to the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, after the father of the bride's toast, we'll hear from Bradley's best man, James Hamilton. I froze my fork halfway to my mouth as the entire room erupted in surprised murmurs, and all eyes turned to our table. Best man, I hissed. You're the best man. James winked. Surprise. A collective gasp rippled through the ballroom as James stood and straightened his tie. My mind raced, piecing together the implications. Not Bradley's estranged cousin, his brother. The best man. No wonder people had been staring at us. You lied to me, I whispered as he prepared to leave the table. I omitted some details, he corrected gently. But everything I told you was true. Watch and see. As James walked confidently toward the microphone, the crowd's reaction told its own story. Surprised whispers Bradley's visible emotion, Abigail's tight smile failing to hide her confusion. Clearly, James's presence as best man had not been guaranteed until recently. Good evening, everyone, James began, his voice warm and assured. For those who don't know me, I'm James Hamilton Bradley's brother. A pause. And yes, I am the best man, though that was uncertain until about 48 hours ago. Soft laughter rippled through the crowd, acknowledging the family tension without making it awkward. First, I want to congratulate Bradley and Abigail on their beautiful wedding. May your lives together be filled with love and understanding. He raised his champagne glass in their direction, and Bradley nodded appreciatively, his eyes suspiciously bright. As many of you know, my brother and I have had a complicated relationship in recent years. There's been a difficult family history that nearly kept me from being here today. The room grew quiet, everyone sensing the emotional weight behind his carefully chosen words. But Bradley reached out last week with an olive branch I couldn't ignore. He reminded me that at the end of the day, the bonds of brotherhood matter more than differences in career choices or lifestyles. I watched Bradley swallow hard at the head table, his hand seeking Abigail's, who looked increasingly uncomfortable. True family, James continued, should be about accepting people for who they are, not who we wish they would be. It should be about seeing someone's worth even when, especially when, it doesn't fit our preconceived notions. His words resonated deeply with me, striking chords I'd felt my entire life, but never heard articulated so clearly. Today, I've had the privilege of meeting someone who reminds me what grace under fire looks like, James said, his gaze finding mine across the room. Marina Porter, sister of the bride. Every head in the ballroom turned toward me, and I felt heat rise in my cheeks. The wedding coordinator, looking flustered, directed a spotlight that somehow found me despite the pillar. Marina sat alone at her table, excluded but still supporting her sister on this important day. Her quiet dignity reminded me that family relationships are worth fighting for even when they're difficult. My mother shifted uncomfortably in her seat, while various relatives suddenly seemed fascinated by their dinner rolls. Abigail's expression had transformed from confusion to barely contained anger. "So I propose a toast," James continued smoothly, "to new beginnings and bridges rebuilt, to Bradley and Abigail, and to all of us finding ways to honor our connections, even the complicated ones." As applause filled the room, Bradley stood and walked to his brother, embracing him in a hug that clearly surprised James before he returned it warmly. The moment seemed genuine, a contrast to the carefully choreographed perfection of the rest of the wedding. James returned to our table, slipping back into his seat as the next speech began. "Sorry if I put you on the spot," he whispered. That was... I struggled for words. "Thank you for seeing me." "Hard not to see you," he replied simply. "You're kind of amazing." Before I could respond, I noticed Abigail excusing herself from the head table and making a direct line toward us, her white gown seeming to part the crowd like the bow of a ship. "Incoming," James murmured. "Your sister looks ready for battle." Abigail reached our table, her smile tight and eyes flashing. "Marina, can I speak with you privately?" Without waiting for my response, she turned and walked toward an empty hallway leading to the restrooms. I glanced at James, who nodded encouragingly. "I've got your back," he said quietly. Following my sister, I steeled myself for the confrontation to come. In the relative privacy of the hallway, Abigail turned on me, composure cracking. "What do you think you're doing?" she demanded. "Attending my sister's wedding," I replied evenly. "By making a scene, by somehow convincing Bradley's estranged brother to highlight you in his speech." She crossed her arms. "This day is supposed to be about me." Years of swallowed responses rose in my throat. "Is that why you seated me behind a pillar, so no one would notice I exist?" "Don't be dramatic. I didn't think you'd even notice where you were seated. You always keep to yourself anyway." "Because I've been pushed aside my entire life, Abigail." My voice rose despite my efforts to remain calm. "I'm your only sister, and you've treated me like an unwelcome acquaintance throughout this entire wedding process." "That's not true," she protested, though her eyes slid away from mine. "Really? The bridal shower where I wasn't included in photos, the bachelorette trip. I was uninvited from the rehearsal dinner. I wasn't even invited to. And now a seat behind a pillar at an empty table labeled miscellaneous guests." Several wedding guests had paused near the hallway entrance, pretending not to listen to our increasingly heated exchange. "You're making this about you as usual," Abigail said dismissively. Something in me snapped at her gaslighting. "No, Abigail. This is the first time in my life I'm actually speaking up about how you and our parents have treated me. I have spent decades shrinking myself to avoid overshadowing your perfection. I have congratulated you, supported you, and shown up for you regardless of how you've treated me. All I ever wanted was to be acknowledged as your sister, to have some small place in your life." Tears threatened, but I blinked them back, refusing to break down. "I didn't ask for a spotlight. I just wanted a seat at a table where I could actually see you get married." Abigail's face registered surprise at my uncharacteristic directness. Before she could respond, our mother appeared at her side. "Girls, this is not the time or place," she hissed, noticing the onlookers. "We can discuss this later." "When, Mom?" I asked quietly. "When has there ever been a right time to acknowledge how this family treats me?" My mother looked genuinely taken aback. "Marina, please, let's not ruin Abigail's wedding." "I think we're done here anyway," I said, suddenly exhausted by the emotional weight of the day. As I turned to leave, James appeared, his timing impeccable. "Everything okay?" he asked, his presence beside me providing unexpected strength. "We're fine," my mother answered quickly, attempting to salvage the situation. "Just a little family discussion." "Actually," I said, "I could use some air." James nodded, placing a gentle hand at the small of my back. "I think that can be arranged." As we walked away, I heard my mother asking Abigail about the cake cutting scheduled for later. Some things never changed. Outside on the terrace overlooking the lake, the evening air cooled my flushed cheeks. James led me to a quiet corner away from the few smokers and couples enjoying the view. You stood your ground, he observed. That couldn't have been easy. The emotional dam broke, then tears flowing freely. A lifetime of practice holding everything in, and I pick my sister's wedding day to finally speak up. Sometimes the pressure builds until there's no choice but release, he said, offering a handkerchief. For what it's worth, you were remarkably composed. I dabbed at my eyes, grateful for waterproof mascara. I'm sorry if I embarrassed you. Marina, he said firmly, waiting until I met his gaze. You have nothing to apologize for. If anything, I should apologize if my speech put you in that position. I meant what I said in there, but I never intended to make things harder for you. His sincerity was palpable. You didn't, I assured him. You actually gave me the courage to say what I've needed to for years. I offered a watery smile. Though I'm still not entirely clear on who you actually are. James laughed softly. Fair enough. The full truth, I am Bradley's brother, technically his half-brother from our father's first marriage. I left the family business 5 years ago to pursue architecture, which caused a major rift. Bradley and I have barely spoken since, until he called last week asking me to be his best man after all. Why didn't you just tell me that from the beginning? Honestly, when I saw you sitting alone, I just wanted to connect without all the baggage of being the best man, or explaining my whole family history. Just two outcasts finding common ground. He shrugged. I didn't expect to like you quite so much. The simple admission warmed something inside me. Even though I'm the weird sister no one wants to acknowledge, especially because you're the authentic sister who refuses to pretend to be someone she's not. His smile was genuine. Should we brave the reception again, or have you had enough family togetherness for one day? I considered the question, weighing the obligations of staying against my emotional well-being. Let's make an appearance for the cake cutting, then reassess. A diplomatic compromise, he nodded approvingly. Shall we? He offered his arm. As we re-entered the ballroom, I noticed something had shifted. Family members who had earlier avoided me now watched with curious eyes. My Uncle Thomas even approached with his wife. Marina, good to see you, he said with unexpected warmth. Your mother mentioned you've been doing well with your design business. The conversation that followed was stilted but cordial, more acknowledgement than I'd received all day before James's speech. Similar interactions followed with various relatives suddenly interested in my life and work. When we returned to our table, I found it was no longer empty. Two elderly guests had been reseated there and greeted us with friendly smiles. The young couple everyone's talking about, the woman said cheerfully. I'm Gladys Bradley's great aunt. This is my husband, Frank. Nice speech, young man, Frank added, shaking James's hand. About time someone said something real at one of these fancy affairs. Through cake cutting and the first dance, James stayed by my side, his steady presence a comfort in the emotionally charged atmosphere. When I spotted Abigail and Bradley preparing to leave for their honeymoon, I briefly considered the traditional family send-off line. Would you regret not saying goodbye? James asked perceptively. No, I realized. I think we've said everything that needed saying tonight. As the reception wound down, James walked me to my car in the now quiet parking area. Thank you, I said simply. You turned what could have been a completely humiliating experience into something empowering. The pleasure was mine, he replied, but I'd like to continue this connection under better circumstances. He pulled a business card from his wallet, writing his personal number on the back. No pressure, but I'd love to take you for coffee sometime, somewhere decidedly more casual than this. I accepted the card, our fingers brushing. I'd like that. Driving home, I realized that despite the emotional roller coaster, I felt lighter than I had in years. Something had shifted, not just with my family, but within myself. The morning after the wedding, I woke to several text messages. One from my mother asking if I'd be attending the post-wedding brunch at the waterfront restaurant. One from Tara asking how the wedding went. And one from James. Good morning. No pressure about brunch, but if you decide to go, I'll be there to provide moral support and possibly escape routes. Either way, I hope you're feeling good about standing up for yourself yesterday. His message made me smile. After a quick shower and deliberation, I decided to attend the brunch. Hiding now would only reinforce the narrative that I didn't belong in family gatherings. Before leaving, I texted James back. I'll be there. Thanks for the backup offer. His response came quickly. See you soon. Look for the guy with the getaway car keys. The brunch was being held at an upscale restaurant overlooking Puget Sound. I arrived deliberately on time rather than early, wearing a casual but polished outfit that felt like armor against whatever reception awaited me. The atmosphere when I entered was noticeably different from the wedding. Several relatives who had barely acknowledged me yesterday approached with greetings that seemed almost too enthusiastic. "Marina, lovely to see you," my cousin Samantha gushed. "I've been following your design work on Instagram. So creative." I thanked her politely, aware she had never mentioned following my work during any previous family gathering. Similar interactions followed with various aunts, uncles, and family friends, each suddenly interested in my career and life. James caught my eye from across the room and raised his coffee cup in a subtle salute. His presence immediately eased my tension. "Your fan club has grown overnight," he observed when I reached his side. "Amazing what happens when someone acknowledges you publicly." I replied wryly. "Visibility is powerful," he agreed, "though I suspect your speaking your truth had more impact than my speech." We found seats at a table with some of Bradley's more congenial relatives, who treated me with genuine warmth. Throughout the meal, I noticed James checking in with subtle glances, making sure I was comfortable. The dynamic shifted when Abigail and Bradley arrived an hour into the brunch. Their entrance drew attention, with Abigail looking immaculate despite the previous night's festivities. Bradley immediately spotted his brother and headed our way. "James," he greeted warmly, "glad you stayed for brunch." Then turning to me with equal warmth, "Marina, good to see you again." His genuine tone suggested he either didn't know about or didn't approve of how I'd been treated at the wedding. We chatted briefly about their honeymoon plans before Abigail joined us, her expression carefully neutral. "Marina," she acknowledged stiffly. "I didn't expect you to come today." "Family brunch," I replied simply. "Seemed important to be here." An uncomfortable silence followed until Bradley mentioned he'd love to see some of my design work sometime, remembering our conversation months earlier. "Marina did the most amazing watercolor of your proposal spot," James mentioned. "I noticed it among the gifts." Bradley's face lit up. "Really? That's incredible. We'll have to open that first when we get back." Abigail looked between her husband and me, something shifting in her expression. After Bradley was pulled away by his parents, she touched my arm. "Can we talk in private?" I nodded, following her toward the restaurant's outdoor patio. James caught my eye, silently asking if I wanted company. I shook my head slightly. This conversation needed to happen between sisters. On the patio overlooking the water, Abigail turned to me. "I want to clear the air after last night." I waited, not making it easier for her. "I didn't think you'd even notice where you were seated," she began, echoing her words from yesterday. "You've always been so independent." "Independent or excluded?" I countered quietly. Abigail sighed, running a hand through her perfect hair. "Look, we've never been close. I didn't think it would matter to you. We've never been close because you and our parents made sure of that," I said, keeping my voice level. "But you're my only sister, Abigail. Of course it matters." Something vulnerable flashed across her face before she regained composure. "You've always been the creative one, the special one. Mom and Dad might have focused on my achievements, but they always talked about your unique gifts and artistic vision." I stared at her, genuinely confused. "Are you saying you were jealous of me?" "Not jealous exactly," she backtracked. "But you've always had this freedom, this ability to be yourself without worrying about expectations. Do you know how exhausting it is being perfect all the time?" The irony of her perspective knocked me speechless momentarily. "Abigail, I've spent my entire life feeling invisible next to you. Every family gathering, every holiday, every milestone, you were the star and I was barely a footnote." "That's not how I saw it," she insisted. "You gotta be different, special." I had to be exactly what everyone expected. We stood looking at each other, two sisters who had grown up in the same house, but experienced completely different childhoods. "We're probably not going to resolve decades of misunderstanding in one conversation," I finally said. "Probably not." She agreed, a hint of her usual confidence returning. "But I didn't intentionally try to hurt you with the seating. I just didn't think about it." "That's kind of the problem, Abigail. Not thinking about it. Not thinking about me." Before she could respond, our mother appeared at the patio door. "There you two are." Everyone's looking for the bride. Abigail's straightened mask of perfection sliding back into place. We'll finish this conversation another time. Though not entirely satisfying, the exchange had revealed something important. Abigail's perspective was entirely different from mine. It didn't excuse her behavior, but offered a glimpse into a complexity I hadn't considered. I decided to leave the brunch shortly after, emotionally drained from the confrontation. As I was gathering my purse, James approached. Heading out? He asked. Yes, I think I've fulfilled my family obligation quota for the weekend. He smiled. Mind if I call you later? I'd like to check in. I'd like that, I replied honestly. Walking to my car, my phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. Answering, I heard James's voice. Too soon? He asked, and I could hear the smile in his voice. I laughed, turning to see him standing near the restaurant entrance with his phone to his ear. Just a bit. What's up? I was wondering if you might want to grab coffee sometime this week. A real conversation without family drama as background music. I'd like that, I said, warmth spreading through me. Great. I know a place that's the complete opposite of wedding opulence. Mismatched mugs baristas with attitude and absolutely no champagne fountains. Sounds perfect. 3 days later, I met James at a small coffee shop in my neighborhood. The space was exactly as he'd described, eclectic and unpretentious, with local art on the walls and baristas who took their craft seriously. Our conversation flowed naturally as we discovered shared interests beyond our complicated family dynamics. James described his journey from reluctant business student to passionate architect who finally broke away from family expectations. It wasn't easy, he admitted, stirring his coffee. There were 2 years where my father and I didn't speak at all. Bradley was caught in the middle. What changed? I asked. Time, mostly. And I proved myself by winning some design awards. Success has a way of changing how family views your rebellious choices. He smiled wryly. But also I stopped seeking their approval and started living authentically. That's when I finally felt free. His words resonated deeply. I'm still working on that part, I confessed. The wedding might have been your turning point, he suggested. You stood up for yourself beautifully. It felt terrifying and liberating all at once. James reached across the table, his fingers lightly touching mine. Freedom often does. As our coffee date extended into dinner, I felt something rare and precious growing between us, a connection based on mutual understanding and genuine interest. For the first time in my life, I was being seen completely for who I was, without comparison or judgment. Bradley called me yesterday, James mentioned as we shared dessert. He wants to get together when they return from their honeymoon. Try to rebuild our relationship. How do you feel about that? I asked. Cautiously optimistic. We were close once before family expectations drove us apart. He paused. He also mentioned he loved your watercolor, said it was their favorite gift. I smiled, pleased despite myself. That's nice to hear. Would you consider a similar fresh start with Abigail? He asked carefully. I considered the question seriously. I'm not closing any doors, but I need boundaries this time. Real respect, not just being tolerated when convenient. That sounds healthy. He nodded approvingly. Walking back to my apartment in the gentle evening air, James took my hand naturally, our fingers interlacing. The simple gesture felt more intimate than any kiss could have been, a connection freely offered and accepted. Thank you, I said quietly. For what? For seeing me at that wedding. For sitting at my reject table when you could have been at the head table. For everything that followed. He stopped walking, turning to face me. Marina, you were the most interesting person in that ballroom. Sitting with you wasn't charity, it was the highlight of my evening. As he leaned down to kiss me gently, I realized that sometimes the most painful experiences can lead to unexpected gifts. Being hidden behind that pillar had ultimately made me visible in ways I never anticipated. 6 months after Abigail's wedding, my life had transformed in ways I couldn't have imagined that day behind the pillar. My design studio was thriving partly due to newfound confidence that influenced my work and client interactions. No longer apologizing for my style or undercharging for my services, I had attracted several high-profile projects that challenged and excited me. But the most significant change was my relationship with James, which had grown steadily since our coffee shop date. His patience, humor, and unwavering support created a partnership unlike anything I'd experienced before, one where I felt valued exactly as I was. "What do you think about this layout?" I asked him one evening as we sat in my apartment looking at designs for a boutique hotel lobby I was working on. James studied the renderings thoughtfully. "The flow is perfect, but what if you move the seating area to capture the morning light better?" His architectural perspective complemented my design sense, making our professional conversations as engaging as our personal ones. We had fallen into an easy rhythm of sharing work challenges and celebrating successes together. Tonight was particularly special, our first attempt at hosting both our families for dinner. The idea had emerged gradually as tentative connections formed in the months following the wedding. "Are you sure about this?" I asked nervously, checking the pasta sauce simmering on the stove. "6 months ago, I couldn't have imagined having my sister and mother at my dinner table." James wrapped his arms around me from behind, resting his chin on my head. "I'm sure that whatever happens, we'll handle it together. Besides, Bradley's been a good buffer in the Hamilton family reunion so far." Indeed, Bradley had made genuine efforts to rebuild his relationship with James, their weekly basketball games becoming a tradition that helped heal old wounds. Through Bradley, James had even established a cautious rapport with his father, who had finally acknowledged his son's architectural success. My own family reconciliation had progressed more slowly. After several strained coffee meetings with Abigail, we had established a fragile new understanding. Not the close sisterly bond of childhood dreams, but a respectful acknowledgement of our differences and occasional shared experiences. "She's trying," James observed as I arranged appetizers. "That counts for something." The doorbell rang, signaling the beginning of our experimental family gathering. James squeezed my hand reassuringly before opening the door to welcome Bradley and Abigail. "Marina, everything looks amazing," Bradley said warmly, handing me a bottle of wine. Abigail followed with a stiff smile and an awkward side hug. "Thanks for having us. Your place is creative." Coming from my sister, this was practically effusive praise for my colorful, art-filled apartment. James's father arrived next with his new wife, followed shortly by my mother, who brought an expensive bakery dessert despite my assurance that I had prepared something. "I wasn't sure what you were making," she explained in typical fashion. "This is a backup." Once seated around my expanded dining table, I observed the strange new reality we were creating. Two families with complicated histories attempting connection through James and me. The conversation began awkwardly, but warmed as the wine flowed. Bradley shared funny stories from their honeymoon, while James's father surprisingly engaged my mother in a discussion about Seattle's changing architecture. Marina's redesign of the Henderson Building lobby was featured in Design Monthly, James mentioned during a lull in conversation. "Show them the spread, babe." As I retrieved the magazine, I noticed Abigail's expression, a mixture of surprise and something that might have been grudging respect. "This is really impressive," she acknowledged, studying the photographs. "I had no idea your work was at this level." "Marina's been this talented since we were kids," my mother interjected, surprising me. "Remember those murals she painted in her bedroom? The school principal wanted her to design the graduation programs too." I stared at my mother, trying to process her suddenly unearthed memories of achievements she had never previously acknowledged. "You never told me that," I said quietly. My mother looked uncomfortable. "Didn't I? Well, I was always very proud of your artistic abilities." Though revisionist, her statement represented a tentative step toward recognizing her role in my invisibility. I exchanged glances with James, who gave me an encouraging nod. "Thank you for remembering that now," I said simply, choosing grace over confrontation. The evening continued with increasingly relaxed conversation, occasional tense moments, and even genuine laughter. By dessert, it was clear that while we would never be the perfectly harmonious family portrait, we were at least facing each other across the table, rather than hiding behind pillars of resentment and misunderstanding. After everyone left, James helped me load the dishwasher. "That went better than expected," he observed. "Surprisingly, yes," I agreed, though my mother's selective memory about my childhood achievements was interesting. "People rewrite history to ease their conscience," he said. "The important thing is that you know your truth, and now you're being seen for who you really are." 2 weeks later, a large envelope arrived containing wedding photos. I hesitated before opening it, unsure what emotions they might trigger. Inside, beyond the formal portraits and carefully curated moments, I found something unexpected: a candid shot from the reception. In the background, partially visible behind other guests, James and I were dancing, both laughing at something he had said. Despite being peripheral to the main subject, the genuine joy on our faces drew the eye. I decided to frame it not as a reminder of exclusion, but as evidence of the turning point that had led to my current happiness. That evening, as James and I discussed holiday plans, the question of family gatherings inevitably arose. "My father wants us to come for Christmas Eve," James said, and Bradley mentioned hosting Christmas dinner. "And my mother is expecting us for Christmas brunch," I added. "That's a lot of family time." James took my hand, his expression thoughtful. "What do you want to do?" "We can decline any or all invitations, create our own traditions instead." I considered the question seriously. I think I want to accept, but with boundaries. Shorter visits, no overnight stays, and we leave if anyone starts treating either of us poorly. "I like your thinking." He nodded. "Family can be both born and chosen. We get to decide what role they play in our lives." As we sat together planning our holiday strategy, I reflected on the journey from that wedding day to now. Being seated behind that pillar had been painful, but ultimately transformative, forcing me to confront patterns I had accepted my entire life and finally speak my truth. The stranger who had sat beside me and changed everything was now the person I trusted most in the world. The family that had tried to hide me away was slowly learning to see me. And most importantly, I had finally learned to see myself, not as someone's overlooked sister, but as Marina Porter, worthy of love and recognition exactly as I am. Have you ever felt invisible in your own family? Or had a moment when a stranger's kindness changed everything? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Sometimes the people who see us most clearly are the ones we least expect. Don't forget to like and subscribe if this story resonated with you, and share it with someone who might need to be reminded of their own worth today. Thank you for listening, and remember, sometimes being hidden leads to finally being truly seen.